everything. All right. And your book starts with 6 wars. First chapter, I think, 6 wars. Going back to the Spanish, but you kind of dwell on World War II, Pearl Harbor, don't you?
Well, that's because I had more information on that than any other. It was something I could really document extensively, and I wanted to make sure I was persuasive when I started, so I didn't really do it chronologically. Although in the movie Shattering, we do it chronologically.
The show will go live in 5 seconds.
All right, here we go.
American.
3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order.
The New World Order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests.
He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial.
How can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time that I draw near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear.
Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show?
My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something.
We both took the same oath, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that.
Well, it doesn't show. How can I contain this anguish and this pain? Knowing that your eyes are blinded by the lies.
He is the free American, Clay Douglas. Catch the Free American weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern.
Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger wells inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon down, the sky is not the sun.
For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8631.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I'm your host. I'm Clay Douglas. And my guest today is James Perloff. He is the author of the book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, Unmasking the Forces Behind Global Destruction. Hello, James. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on your show again.
Well, I really appreciate you and what you've done and what you're doing. You are trying to wake people up. I think you point out in the book that we're not viewing history right. We're basically being lied to. I think the proper term is warfare by deception. And you make the statement here in your introduction that The Bible views Satan as a real being, God's chief enemy, who has played a major hand in generating evil throughout history, usually through deception. Truth is a Lonely Warrior contends that Satan influences global events and that among his instruments is a powerful organization of men on earth. This organization has fomented many wars, revolutions, and other cataclysms of the past several centuries. Their goal, to establish a world government run by Satan's puppet, a figure the Bible calls the beast or Antichrist. Now, I agree with that. I agree with that. And actually, Satanism is the world's oldest religion, isn't it?
Well, I guess you could say that it goes back to the first influence of Satan, and negatively, that we know about, which was in the Garden of Eden. I don't know if we'd call it a religion at that point, but it was his deceptions were being communicated and listened to and adhered to a certain extent. So I guess you might say that. But later on, it became, a formal thing where people would actually be performing rituals and sacrificing children to demons and things of that nature.
Now, I've done stories recently that exact thing that you just stated is happening within the Catholic Church. Supposedly one of the good guys. Now, many years ago, 40-some-odd years ago, 40-plus years ago, I wrote a science fiction story about some powerful beings that we called angels or we called gods that were walking among men on earth and influencing them, and their legends have been passed down to us as myths. And in my science fiction book, my hero in the book was Lucifer, the angel Lucifer. And Lucifer got kicked out of the starship or the earthship or the UFO that was named Heaven by a jealous God. Call him Yahweh. I think in my science fiction book it was, I called him something else. And but this God, this captain of the earthship Heaven, Yahweh, was not the good guy. And he went insane and wanted to dominate all the people on earth, and my character Lucifer, again science fiction, opposed him, and for that he got kicked out of the earthship to the hell that was earth at the time of the flood, or the time of the crossing. Worlds in collision is what I really based the story on. And I'm not really convinced that I was writing science fiction. I think maybe there was somewhere back in my memory, in my DNA, there was something else embedded in there. And if we've got child sacrifice going on in the Catholic Church, and we also have the organization that has as its motto today, warfare by deception, is the Jews, is the Mossad, the so-called, as Benjamin Friedman put it, the so-called Jews, the Jews that say they're Jews but are not, or of the synagogue of Satan. So we've got two religions here, actually three, if you want to toss in the Muslims here, that are our opposition. And this is what the bankers, and I think you've got a chapter in here talking about the bankers being satanic in nature. The bankers always fund both sides of every conflict so they can make money off the weapons, so they can make money off the suffering, and it's kind of what we've been going through for the last 100 years. You talk about how these wars were started by the sinking of the Lusitania, by the Gulf of Tonkin incident that got us into Vietnam. Now, I volunteered for Vietnam, and some point in my education there, when I figured out that we were supposedly to go into Vietnam to fight the communists, but every plank on the Communist Manifesto is intact in America today. So who are these enemies? Who's working for Satan? Now, supposedly Satan offered Jesus all the kingdoms of the earth if he had worked with him. Jesus turned him down, but it seems to me that somebody bought into that. Somebody accepted his offer, and they're part of these cabals, these banksters, or whatever you want to call them. They're not working for mankind, they're not working for our own good, and they're setting country against country. Could you kind of expand on that? Am I off the world? Am I still writing science fiction?
Well, what you just said right now is correct, and I wrote the same thing in the book, that I believe that when Jesus spurned the offer of control of the cities of the world by Satan, that somebody else accepted that offer. And I actually think that when you look at you mentioned the Mossad, and I know you're familiar with all the evils that Israel has inflicted, its false flags, its attack on U.S. liberty, its involvement in 9/11, its program of expansion, and the Zionist control of the banking. And you look again and again, you see these guys there, and they seem to have an in with Satan, and they seem to be at the upper level of this hierarchy. So I have a feeling that because the Jews had initially in the Old Testament been the representative of God, or he wanted them to represent his will on earth and to demonstrate his 10 commandments to the earth, that when they felt rejected with the ascendancy of Christianity, I believe they may have been approached by Satan wanting to call these, to say to the world, look, I've got God's people on my side, and maybe even get people to hate God by having them be involved in so many evil things. Now, by the way, I'm half Jewish myself, and I'm always cautioning people not to indict all Jews. My father was fully Jewish, but he was a completely Americanized Jew. He never went to synagogue. He had nothing to do with the Talmud. All his friends were Gentiles. He was a baseball fan. He had nothing to do with it at all. But at the same time, there's undeniably this hierarchy, these elders of Zion who have been looking to create a greater Israel, which, by the way, just to tie it all together, there's basically 3 isms. There's which these people have backed, these bankers. One is globalism, which would be world government, which we saw initiated at the League of Nations and then strengthened by the organization to replace that, the UN. And of course, it has many stepping stones, such as the EU and NAFTA, but all leading towards that world domination. So globalism is one ism. Another is communism, and these same bankers, the Schiffs, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds, these Zionist bankers backed the overthrow of the Tsar in 1917. But the third ism is Zionism. It was also in 1917 that they blackmailed the British government into signing the Balfour Declaration, by which Britain promised to take over Palestine, which Britain had never been in Palestine before, but they invaded it, and a lot of people remember the movie Lawrence of Arabia. There was no real strategic value in World War I to invading Palestine, but they went in there to fulfill the Balfour Declaration, by which the Jews promised to bring America into the war and turn around the fortunes of the war for Great Britain in World War I, in return for them establishing Palestine as a homeland for the Jews. And so those are the three isms: the communism, the globalism, and the Zionism. But of course, you could always add to that another ism, which would be capitalism, because as you know, they're very good at running and rigging the markets.
Yes. Yes, and let me clarify something. This is a statement I make on my show on a regular basis. I don't care who your grandmother slept with. You know, it does not matter to me. You know, I was born, my grandfather was a Methodist preacher. You know, I don't hate the Baptist. You know, and matter of fact, I had one woman, Dr. Carly, who was talking about the vaccines and vaccinations, and I made the comment that I don't hate the Jews. I kind of admire them. If us white folks, if us Caucasians had it as together as the Jews do, we'd own the Federal Reserve, we'd own the Bank of England, we'd own the International Monetary Fund, and we might have a just government. But, you know, the what religion, what area, what place on earth, what culture we're born into, that's where we got to start. That does not mean you know, I'm a proud Texan, but I don't hate anybody from Louisiana or New Mexico. You know, I do kind of resent having to go to New Mexico or Colorado to see my mountains there. You know, I think we ought to restore the republic and take our mountains back, but that's just you know, my personal feelings. Don't like having to go to another state to ski. But the Jews, this is the way Benjamin Friedman, who is a Jewish historian, who was there when all of this was happening, World War I, World War II, outlines it very well. And the Zionist, the ADL, the evil branch, if you want, of this particular tribe, they attacked him. He was he was Jewish, and he says that he was attacked. His businesses closed down, kind of the same way mine were. So there are certainly, and back in the 60s, I financed a man by the name of Jack Hara, who just happened to be Jewish, and he wrote Emperor Wears No Clothes, which is basically a Bible of the hemp movement, and led to the legalization of hemp and marijuana in a couple of states now. I think it ought to be 50 states that it ought to be legal in. I think that the communists, again, the communism, that Americans don't know anything about it today. I mean, we knew more about it when Joe McCarthy was opposing it, but somehow we've forgotten. The propaganda has been so good by these Zionists, and we'll call them Zionists because differentiate them from you and your family. These Zionists have, you're absolutely right. You said that the Jewish bankers financed communism. Jacob Schiff financed communism. And how Americans can't recognize that the communism is happening now. It's here among us, and it's not just your, you know, the guy that the bank manager down there. We're talking about a infiltration, a subversion, and this happened, and this was documented pretty well during World War II. The communists infiltrated our government to such an extent we couldn't even. They were working against us, and they were working force. We were paying them to oppose us, essentially. Is that accurate?
Oh, that's correct. I was going to give you a quote. You said that communism is still around, and it's very true. A lot of people think that communism disappeared when Gorbachev came to power and announced glasnost and that it no longer exists. But even if it goes under another name, it's still around. Basically, communism is just the government controlling everything, and so Obamacare would be an example of that. That's the government taking over your health care and ultimately going to take away your freedom of choice. But I wanted to give a quote. It's from the socialist Norman Thomas. He said, quote, "The people will never knowingly accept socialism, but under the name of liberalism, they will adopt every fragment of the socialist program until one day America will be a socialist nation without knowing how it happened," unquote. Norman Thomas, socialist. And so that's just a remark on the power of semantics. If you call something, say we want to have a communist state, of course people will reject that. They'll think of Stalin and the gulags. So you might get away with calling it democratic socialism, but maybe socialism, people are still wise to that, so you call it liberalism. But it's just semantics, and it's kind of like instead of calling an illegal immigrant, you call them a refugee or something like that. You know, you just change the words around, and Orwell talked about that quite a bit, of course, in his book 1984, how they would have something called newspeak, and how words would take on different meanings. But you're quite right, that communism is still with us. It may not be called Marxism, they may not refer to call Marx anymore. But in terms of, just look at the NSA, the surveillance state, that is all very reminiscent of what was going on under Stalin. And you know, the building of these FEMA camps, very reminiscent of the gulags under communist Stalin. So even if they're not bandying about the word communism these days, it is taking shape again. It's the same forces that financed it are the ones that are in place now, and they have the same intentions for us as they did for the people of Russia a century ago.
I've tried to tell people that everything that they're doing here in America is leading up to, and I've been telling them this for over 20 years, is leading up to the same type of what happened to the Russian people. I mean, you talked about the Balfour Declaration. You mentioned the League of Nations. There were only 2 countries that opposed the League of Nations and wouldn't sign on to it, and that led to World War II. But those 2 countries were Russia under the Tsar and the United States. For the United States, they gave us the Federal Reserve and took over control of our money and therefore our politicians. I mean, if you print your very own money, pretty soon you can buy up your whole neighborhood. And that's exactly what they've done. They bought up the companies, the media companies, the defense contractors, to make all the money off from promoting these wars. And that's with Russia, they killed the Tsar and then went on to murder 60 million white Christian Russians. Might have been a few Jews in there they'd killed too. Anybody like Benjamin Friedman that wanted to get the truth out didn't want to go along with the lies. That's why he called them so-called Jews. And we're really approaching, you know, they say if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I wanted to get your input on what's happening right now in Syria with Russia. Paul Craig Roberts, a former U.S. Treasury Secretary, he told King World News that 4 straight days of Russian bombings in Syria, Putin has sent a decisive message to the West. He says Russians have bombed key targets, and the rest of the world is watching and saying, Putin just took over and put a stop to this madness. This is one of the points of insanity to me, because we went through a Cold War. The war we're going through now, according to Homeland Security, Colonel John Brinkerhoff, I just featured him yesterday on my show. Colonel Brinkerhoff says we're in for a long war. This war may go a little longer than the Cold War. And the enemy's weak. The enemy doesn't have tanks, it doesn't have planes, it doesn't have helicopters. So they're going to use unconventional methods. I think, and this war will be fought on American soil. This is coming from Homeland Security, their first meeting, or first briefing of law enforcement. So, I mean, they're coming right out. It's always interesting. They always come out and tell you. They give you all the clues, and sometimes they just lay it out for you. We're in for a long war. And one of the things that really I kind of fear is that Putin is doing what we should be doing. He is, if he is protecting the Russian people, he is standing up against these terrorists, which we financed. We financed this here. It's really hard to tell who the good guys are and who the bad guys are here for the average American. Your thoughts on this? The Syrian thing, we're financing the rebels that are trying to overthrow the Syrian government, Assad, and Russia is fighting the terrorists that we financed. I mean, this is just a very near approaching insanity to me.
Well, you know, I've struggled for some time, Clayton, over Putin, whether he's the real deal or whether he ultimately answers to the same powers that be that Obama does. One thing that's held me back for a long time on favorable views towards Russia, there was a book published in 1984, 5 years before Glasnost. It was called New Lies for Old by Anatoly Golitsyn. He was the highest-ranking KGB defector to ever defect to the West, and he predicted Glasnost 5 years before it happened in that book. He said that the Berlin Wall is going to come down, you're going to see a liberal new leader come to light, and of course that was Gorbachev. And he said, but it's all going to be fake, it's just to deceive the West, and ultimately Russia is going to revert to communism in the end. And so, because so many of his predictions came true, in fact 94% of them did, over 300 that he made, I've been kind of very cautiously watching Russia. However, I'm inclined to take a more favorable view of Putin at this point. I don't know if you've seen the guy at all, but there's a guy with a YouTube channel called Brother Nathaniel.
Yes, sir.
And yeah, he's really good. You know, he was born and raised Jewish. He converted to Christianity, and he really sticks it to the Zionists. And he believes that Putin's the real deal. He says that Putin, he paid off. You know, that Russia had been stripped by the bankers after the Cold War ended, and but he paid off the Rothschild debt. He built up a Russia again by selling oil and natural gas, and he also revived the Christian faith there. And it appears that, as far as I can see, he's genuine about it. And I've seen videos of this people in Syria cheering. And they say that the Russian planes did more damage to ISIS in one day than our planes did in a year. But and of course, you know that Obama wanted to attack Assad in 2013, but he couldn't get the American support for it. And people were sick of Middle East wars. And so then he came back, they went back to the drawing board, and they came out, well, instead of attacking Assad, we'll attack ISIS. But ISIS was the very group that we trained and financed to fight Assad. It didn't make any sense at all. And it seems that what Putin's doing makes a lot more sense. He's in there at the invitation of the Syrians. And who bombed a hospital just a couple of days ago was the U.S., not Russia. You know, I'm an old-time John Bircher, and I certainly never thought I'd see the day where I took a stronger liking to the guy leading Russia than in America. But I have to say that right now, Russia's acting more like a Christian country and more favorable to its own national interests and even the interests of another country like Syria right now. We've done nothing but bring chaos to the Middle East. If you've seen that video by, sorry, I'm just having a slight senior moment here. One of our top generals did a video where he said that we would have 7 wars against 7 countries in the Middle East. This was in, he said this was in 2001, and those wars included Iraq and Libya and Syria. And of course, we attacked Iraq over weapons of mass destruction. Turned out they never had any. Even President Bush and Colin Powell admitted that. And we bombed the heck out of Libya, apparently because Muammar Gaddafi was going to use the gold dinar to sell oil with, and that was going to threaten the bankster dollar-based system. And of course, we've been going after Syria. Syria is one of the few countries left that doesn't have a Rothschild central bank. It doesn't borrow money from the IMF. They've outlawed GMOs. They've got natural gas. They've got, of course, it's also part of the land that Israel wants is what they call Greater Israel. So there's all kinds of reasons they want to go after it. And Putin seems to be down there taking out these CIA-backed foreign militants who are not true Syrian rebels fighting for freedom. They're simply backed by the West to create more chaos, more of the extended chaos of the so-called Arab Spring that we've already seen demolish Iraq, and we've still got the war going on in Afghanistan. I should mention the war in Afghanistan. We supposedly started that war because they wouldn't give us bin Laden, and you know, all the Taliban asked for was proof that bin Laden was behind 9/11. We wouldn't give it to him. We went in anyway. Well, bin Laden has been dead now for even by the official account for several years. Yet why are we still in Afghanistan and now we're fighting in Syria? So I have to say that based on the reaction of the Syrian people, what Putin's doing there right now is the most sensible thing. And he said recently in his UN speech, Putin said the best solution to the refugee crisis is to restore order to the Middle East, to get those governments stable again. And I have to agree, we don't want millions of migrants leaving the Middle East, which I think is what Israel wants. They want that territory, but what Putin's doing, I think, is spot on right now. So far, it's been good, and I just have to say that based on what I'm seeing right now, collectively, in spite of the doubts I've harbored in the past about who might be controlling Putin ultimately behind the scenes, I have to say I like what I see from the man.
I do too, and it's a little unnerving, a little frightening to me, because I have been, they have tried to, the Jewish media, the Jewish-run ADL, Southern Poverty Law, have tried to make me into some kind of terrorist for starting the militias here. They were very, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they were very, very afraid that with my magazine and the radio show and with the militias behind me, veterans behind me, they were really afraid that I might be able to make enough money to be able to rise in power here and have an armed force behind me. They, you know, they fail to tell you, they'll tell you I started the militias, but they don't tell you I started in the governor's office. Wasn't exactly a terrorist group. You know, what part of the Second Amendment don't you understand? It's, if we support, if Russia, if Putin is trying to do the right thing to stop terrorism, really stop terrorism, I've said this whole war against terror is a war against anyone, anywhere in the world that doesn't want to go along with one world government, one world government of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers. And so,
well said.
If we get, we back Putin, we get into the position here, if we're going to war with Russia and we're doing what Ezra Pound did in World War II, Ezra Pound was broadcasting on a shortwave and giving us the other side of the story about Hitler and Mussolini. And of course, Ezra Pound was, after the war, was arrested and put in an insane asylum. Eustace Mullins helped get him out and was a friend of his. Eustace Mullins was a friend of mine and did some great work, death by injection, and the story of the whole Federal Reserve. If Putin is the good guy and we back him or talk about him, then we could be tagged with terrorism, and they've already made it possible for people like you and I to be arrested, put in a FEMA camp without charges, without a trial, just stamped up terrorist. You don't agree with Obama, you don't But we're navigating in dangerous waters, and that brings up the other subject that I wanted to talk about. I want your input on, because even General Patton suggested that we fought on the wrong side. We backed mass murderer Stalin, and it was the British. Germans offered all kinds of peace treaties to the English. The English wouldn't accept it. So what do we... it seems like we're going through the same thing here. I just had information, a show on Captain Ramsey, who wrote The Nameless War. Another guy, another Englishman that was put in jail for trying to get the truth out about the banksters out there. Doesn't seem like much has changed in the last century here.
No, the same things have been going on. I just tweeted a few days ago a movie I discovered. It was called Sands of Sorrow, and it was a little publicized film made in 1950 about 750,000 Palestinian refugees who were living in tents, many of them starving, as an appeal to help them, but of course it was suppressed. I'm sure the movie didn't get much circulation. That was 1950, and now 65 years later, this was mostly shot in Gaza in 1950. We see the people of Gaza still being suppressed and bombed by the Israelis with American and other foreign equipment. We're still giving them about $3 billion a year in military aid. They've got about 4,000 tanks, hundreds of warplanes. The Palestinians over there haven't got a single tank or warplane. All of it got is rocks used to back at the tanks. Hasn't changed. Hasn't changed since World War II or World War I. There's tremendous continuity. If you look at World War I and World War II, goal world government, League of Nations World War I, UN World War II. You had the Zionist advances, Balfour Declaration World War I, State of Israel World War II. You had the communist advances, World War I, you got the first communist state, the Soviet Union. World War II, you got communism spread over half the globe. And of course, you got the Federal Reserve, created 1913, 6 months before the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, financing our involvement in World War I to a large extent. And then World War II, you got the World Bank, So you've got this continuity, and you can see where World War III would lead to, but you're absolutely right. It's the same forces. It's the same goals. Some of the players may change, of course. They do change because of time. But it's the same interest. It's the Freemasons. It's with the Zionists at the top of the human hierarchy, the Zionist bankers, and their goal has been consistent throughout time. There may be a different nation than before, and you saw how things switched after World War Two, the Russians became the bad guys after being the good guys, and then in the Far East, the Japanese became the good guys when they had been the bad guys, and the Chinese switched from good guys to bad guys. So they switched some of the things around, and they may change their semantics a little bit, but ultimately it's the same players, the same forces, with the same ultimate goals.
You're absolutely right. And by the way, I wanted to give you a little piece of information. You talk about Pearl Harbor. You talk about the Roosevelt knowing in advance that this was coming. I had a friend I met in Albuquerque. His name was Eden Rainey. Hopefully he's still alive, getting pretty old. He was in the Army, in the barracks at Pearl Harbor. And the order came down that the soldiers were to turn in their ammunition. They were supposed to take their ammunition and turn it in. His squad didn't. When the planes came over, they shot one down. It crashed on the roof of the barracks. Eden went up on the roof, pulled the pilot out, searched him, and found a map. The next day, they put out an announcement that whoever had found the body, they were to turn in anything that they had found, and they threatened them. The whole squad would be locked down until whoever went up on the roof turned it in. Eden Rainey turned it in so they could get out of the barracks. What he found was a map showing every location of the fleet there at Pearl Harbor. There was one discrepancy. The USS Arizona, was docked where the aircraft carrier was supposed to be docked. The aircraft carrier was listed on the map in the same location as the USS Arizona, which should explain why the USS Arizona was hit so many times and sunk right there. This is definite proof that what you say is absolutely right. We knew. The Japanese knew. They were fed the information. And the U.S. government certainly didn't want that information to get out.
That's a great story, and he's got a great name, Eden, by the way. But let me just elaborate on that. The Japanese were, in fact, spying on the fleet at Pearl Harbor. 37% of Japan's population was ethnically Japanese. They had a consulate there. And we, of course, were decrypting their messages, all of their diplomatic messages, so we knew that their Honolulu consulate was sending the people in Tokyo the exact locations of our ships and dock. And as the December 7th, 1941 date approached, the Honolulu consulate was asked to step up those reports. And so that's why that Japanese pilot that Eden Rainey examined had a map on him. It was from their consulate. But the important thing on the American side is that our commanders in Hawaii, General Short, the Army commander, and Admiral Kimmel, the fleet commander, who were crucified over what happened by Roosevelt, this information was not given to them. Roosevelt knew that the Japanese spies were giving Honolulu the exact locations of ships and dock. But he had many other warnings regarding Pearl Harbor. He received personal warnings. Brigadier General Elliot Thorpe, the American military observer in Java sent Washington a total of 4 warnings about Pearl Harbor because the Japanese had also decrypted Japan's codes and had learned that attack was forthcoming. The Dutch military attaché in Washington, FGL Weijerman, warned Washington. We had a warning from Joseph Grew. But those decrypts also, we actually read Japan's declaration of war before they handed it over to Secretary of State Cordell Hull. We knew war was coming. We knew that they were going to attack Pearl Harbor. There was absolutely no question whatsoever in Roosevelt's mind. And I should just add one more thing to this, which is why is it that the Pearl Harbor was housing our fleet in the first place? You know, normally the American fleet, the Pacific Fleet, was based on our own west coast around San Diego. And Roosevelt made the decision to move it as basing to Pearl Harbor in October of 1940. And our fleet commander at that time was Admiral J.O. Richardson. He was outraged by that decision, Clay, and he flew to Washington and gave Roosevelt a whole list of reasons why the fleet should not be there. And there are many reasons. Number one, Hawaii's in the middle of the ocean, and it's surrounded by uninhabited waters, so it's easy to launch a surprise attack from any direction. Of course, you can never do that on America's west coast. Also, the fleet would be boxed in like sardines, so they'd be, perfect targets for attacking planes. Also, the fleet would have to be supplied over 2,000 miles of Pacific, to bring all that oil over there, because they had very limited oil and dry docks, too, at Pearl Harbor. He said it would be bad for the morale of the men. They'd all be separated from their families. There was no reason to put the fleet in Pearl Harbor, and the only reason that Roosevelt could give Richardson for putting the fleet there, he says it will prevent Japanese aggression. Well, of course, as of December the 7th, 1941, everyone knew that Roosevelt was wrong. It did not prevent Japanese aggression, but he was not held liable. History has never held Roosevelt accountable for, number one, putting the fleet in Pearl Harbor, and number two, all of the diplomatic intercepts, personal warnings, and by the way, also decoded naval intercepts, which forecast that attack. And those decoded naval intercepts you can find in Robert Stinnett's book, Day of Deceit, The Truth About Pearl Harbor and World War II. I have an article on on Pearl Harbor on my website. It's called Pearl Harbor Roosevelt's 911. That's on my website, jamesperloff.com, which goes into all of these details, but also gives you the references so you can look them up for yourself.
Now, what I wanted to ask you about was Germany. What about Hitler? I mean, Hitler, he was loved by the German people. I mean, I've watched the films from there. He rode around in an open vehicle, and the German people loved him. And he restored their economy after the Versailles debacle that tried to strip the German people of any wealth that they might have. He restored their economy. I think he was basically a good guy, and I don't believe, this whole 6 million myth. This is another lie, because there wasn't that many Jews in that area at that point in history. What was the game that was played here to bring us in? Hitler tried to offer England peace terms. He did not want to kill the English, and he let when he had some squads and some platoons trapped there, he let them go. What's your view on Hitler? Now, I've got friends that Dr. Jake Wade is a Bible scholar, wonderful man, been an old friend of mine. He's a dean at Timothy Bible College. He's the founder of the Little Red Schoolhouse for homeschoolers. And, he kind of bought into, he didn't want to even talk to me about Hitler. Thought I was wrong, thought Hitler was the bad guy. I don't. What's your opinion of that? I mean, I've also had people on my show that say he didn't die in a bunker and he lived out his life in Argentina. But Hitler opposed the bankers. He opposed the elite. And they've tried to say he killed 6 million Jews. I don't believe that. They've been using that 6 million figure since World War I or before. There's 6 million Jews that are threatened that might die in the Ukraine. So we need to raise money. We need to fund these Jews in the Ukraine. There were 11 million people killed in the Ukraine, but they weren't all Jews. What about that situation? What about World War II? Did we fight on the wrong side? And is that where we're headed today? Is the United States being set up to be the bad guy? We've killed millions of Iraqis, millions of. We funded the war against Iran. What's the correlation here? You know, and I'm German. I mean, my grandparents came from Germany. They were the Wolves and the Von Bears. What's the story here? How should we look at Germany in light of everything we know now?
I'm in agreement with you, and you've raised several points, so I'll try to address them individually. Number one is, why is it that your friend who the biblical scholar was convinced that Hitler was bad? And you know, I was at my own church and encountered a man for the first time. He was a visitor, and got in a conversation, and I found out he was very active in politics and the Tea Party and all. And I know the Tea Party has some deficiencies, but I commended him for being politically active. And he said, well, we have to be active because, you know what, if we weren't active during World War II, we'd all be speaking German today. And I said to him, well, you know, I don't really think the Germans had logistically the capability of invading America. But of course, I could not get into the whole subject with him there. But I wanted to mention, Clay, why it is that people are convinced that Germany was so bad. And it's the big why. And I can explain why that is true for World War II. Maybe a quote is from Dr. Charles Beard, who was the president of the American Historical Association. He was an honest man. He was a man who would tell the truth, and he was smeared late in his life for telling the truth. But here's what he said in 1947 in the Saturday Evening Post. He said, quote, "The Rockefeller Foundation and the Council on Foreign Relations intend to prevent a repetition of what they call the debunking journalistic campaign following World War I. This means the Foundation and Council do not want journalists to examine too closely and criticize too freely the propaganda and statements relative to our aims and activities during World War II. In short, they hope that the policies and measures of Franklin D. Roosevelt will escape the critical analysis, evaluation, and exposition that befell the policies and measures of World War I and the Allies after World War I," unquote. So what's he saying here, Clay? He's saying that World War I had been debunked. People figured out that the Lusitania was a scam, it was a setup, it was a false flag. The Graham Committee of Congress had discovered that Bernard Baruch and the Zionist bankers had stolen $6 billion from the American people for armaments that were never produced or shipped to the front. And of course, they've been about a lot of other things too. England had acquired 1 million square miles of new territory, even though the war was supposed to be about freedom, you know, and respecting people's sovereignty. So World War I had been debunked, and they said, we're not going to let that happen in World War II. So World War II, they made it a policy to propagandize it. And so you never see an end of movies about World War II. You know, it wasn't just the World War II contemporary movies like Casablanca. It was when I was a kid in the 60s, they had The Great Escape and The Dirty Dozen, and you know, on TV they had Hogan's Heroes in Combat, and recently you have, you know, the Indiana Jones movies and Saving Private Ryan, and they never stopped pushing the idea that it was a great war. And that's what people think was a great war, is because they've never had the opportunity to critically analyze it. But as to the Germans themselves, let me give you a quote, a couple of quotes actually on Hitler, which I think are quite relevant. And the first is from William Guy Carr, who was a fantastic analyst of the Illuminati. He wrote a book that was called Pawns in the Game, which I consider perhaps the best book that's ever written exposing the Illuminati. He was in Canadian intelligence, and he actually exposed the Bilderbergers in 1955, Clay. That's after their first meeting in 54. Now, there's a guy who's on top of the world scene. Here's what he said about Hitler, William Guy Carr. He said, quote, Hitler antagonized the international bankers when he announced his financial policy and monetary reform program. He persuaded Italy, Spain, and Japan to back him in his determination to challenge the power of the cartels and monopolies financed and controlled by the international bankers, particularly their brainchild, the Bank of International Settlements. Since the Great War, the international bankers had set up 26 central banks, modeled after the Federal Reserve Bank. Paul Warburg's creation of 1913 had been steadily attempting to set up a central banking organization that would acknowledge no authority on this planet above it. Hitler knew that if Warburg and his associates had their way, the Bank of International Settlements would become as autocratic as the Bank of England is in regard to British affairs. Hitler decided to take a definite stand and refused to allow Germany to be merged into the League of Monopolistic States, secretly controlled by agents of the Illuminati, unquote, William Guy Carr. But here's a quote that supplements that. It's from Arthur Laurie, who was a British chemist, a professor, and member of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. He wrote this in 1938, quote, as long as Germany and Italy are under their present governments, they will not touch foreign loans. And Germany, by a method of international economy and trading, has eliminated the international financier and those who make profits by playing with foreign exchanges. That is doubtless why the government is being forced by the city, meaning London, to start a trade war with Germany. If the economic methods devised by Germany are successful and spread to other nations, and if Hitler succeeds in his policy of establishing permanent peace in Europe, the high financier will cease to be able to exist. It is therefore their main interest today to plunge the four powers into war in order to destroy Germany and Italy, unquote, Arthur Laurie, member of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So there you have two non-German sources telling you that Hitler had antagonized the international bankers. And to this, Clay, I might add that Germany was fiercely nationalistic. It would not have had any part of the UN. It was opposed, obviously, to Zionism and to communism. And by the way, that Hitler shut down the Freemasonic lodges in Germany. So he was doing a lot of things that the Illuminati didn't like. And that is why he's been demonized as the most evil man who ever lived. You know, it's kind of almost a joke to me, but if you have an argument with someone about evil and they're looking for a metaphor to represent evil, they'll say Hitler, you know. Well, supposing Hitler did that, would you still support it? You know, he is the metaphor, the symbol of evil, and that is a result of what Hitler himself explained was the big lie. If you repeat something often enough, people will believe it. But it's very clear that he stood in the way of the international bankers who refused loans. He was attempting to destroy the Bolsheviks, which was their creation, and he was opposed to the Zionists, and he was opposed to Freemasonry. And there you kind of have it. And as far as the Holocaust goes, I tweeted something recently to people. I said, you know, David Irving challenged the Holocaust and he went to prison. You know, David Irving's a British historian. Walter Duranty denied the Holodomor, which is the Ukrainian Holocaust created by the Jewish Bolsheviks, and he got a Pulitzer Prize. Now, go figure, right? So it's very clear, yes, you're absolutely right about Germany, and they certainly were not interested in conquering Britain. You're absolutely right. They offered peace many times to Britain, and that was why Rudolf Hess flew there. He was Hitler's personal deputy. He flew there on May 10th, 1941. The date is no coincidence. One month later, war broke out with Russia. The Germans knew the war with Stalin was coming. They did not want a two-front war, and they desperately attempted to end the war with Britain. They had no interest whatsoever in conquering it.
None. So our history has been twisted. The victors write the history, and it was the Jews or the Zionists that won World War II with, 3 communist countries? The United States, England, and the Soviet Union.
Yes, with varying degrees of communism, our Constitution is still holding that back at that point, to a certain extent. But of course, Franklin D. Roosevelt, with his New Deal, his federalizing programs were taking over national life, his nationalization of the economy, his confiscation of gold and so forth, was certainly setting us on that path towards communism, even if it wasn't as the extremity that was seen in the Soviet Union under Lenin and Stalin.
Where do we go from here? You've researched the history. Your book is a great book. I got to tell you, I'm really enjoying it. You also wrote The Shadows of Power. It's your history here is impeccable, and I like your writing style also. And since I became aware of what was going on, I mean, with me, it was Waco was a wake-up call. You know, how can our own government go and kill 17 little children to save them from a child molester? It just did not make sense. But this is, the communists have no problem killing children. They killed 17 at Waco. They killed, I believe it was 21 or 22 at Oklahoma City. And Oklahoma City was done basically, I kind of feel responsible for it. You know, they brought in Timothy McVeigh to pretend to be the militia, and they took down the Mira building to try to blame it on the militia. You got any input on that?
Well, I think that one consideration, Clay, is that they were trying to get Homeland Security going, and this is a point that was made by the late Ted Gunderson of the FBI. He was he'd been special agent in charge of the Los Angeles FBI office with 700 personnel under him, and he became a truther and exposed what was going on. Interestingly enough, he actually referred specifically to the works of William Guy Carr, who I quoted on Hitler a little while ago. But he said that when they failed to get Homeland Security out of Oklahoma City, they upgraded to 911. And Clay, my feeling is this, that they realized that if they blamed this on Americans, that they weren't going to get Homeland Security. They had to blame it on foreigners. Because if people thought we were under attack by these people in the Middle East, then you could get even members of the Patriot movement to support the Patriot Act, thinking that this was in their own best interest. And so 911 became the concoction of Osama bin Laden and Muslim terrorists, even though we know now from examination that those several of those alleged 19 terrorists turned out to be alive afterwards, that the terrorists here in America were not behaving like Muslims at all. They were going to strip clubs, and one of them even left his Koran at a strip club, which, you know, that no fundamentalist Muslim is going to do something like that. But by getting people to believe that it was the foreign enemies that were trying to get us, this enabled them to get the Patriot Act encumbering our freedoms to be passed. And my own feeling is that if you take a look, remember the Boston Marathon bombing of 2013. There's a correlation here again. People kind of, after 911, we had all these security measures passed, and then 2013 in March, the news came that Homeland Security was purchasing billions of rounds of ammo and 2,700 armored vehicles, and people were getting alarmed. And you might recall that Rand Paul had a filibuster protesting domestic drone strikes at that time, and people were fed up with the police state. So what did they resort to with the Boston Marathon bombing? And went back to it's the Muslims. And I remember when I live in Boston, and when the Boston Marathon event occurred, I said, well, who's going to get the blame for this? And then the blame came out that it was the Muslims, and they were obviously going back to the 9/11 scenario. They said, okay, the Americans reached their point of resistance where they'll tolerate no more infringement on their freedoms. So we're going to go back to the scenario that worked so well with 9/11 and tell them it's the Muslims these foreigners who are out to get them. And I think that would be my basic take on that. Ultimately, Clay, their goal is to take away our freedoms, to get us into the FEMA camps, certainly, and to turn America into a police state. But sometimes I found they have to get us to go along with that, they have to make us think that it's the foreigners who are out to get us.
You know, after what happened at Waco, I started the militias, and I started this magazine, and I started this radio show. I think, the radio show was designed to feature people like you that have written these books. And by the way, while I'm thinking of that, let's tell people how they can get your book. I believe you can get it on Amazon, and they can get it on your website, which is linked on my page right under this show. It's again, people need to know. People need to know what happened so we can make some decisions about the future. And, you know, I asked myself, what can we do? How can we do this? And a friend of mine, another author, Richard Kelly Hoskins, said that the foundation of every civilization was the self-sufficient family farm. I kind of took that to heart. And anytime a communist regime takes over a country, they go after three classes of people in order. They go after, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, they go after the farmers first because they don't want you to feed yourselves. And in the Ukraine, that was like Kansas, you know. They grew the wheat, they grew the corn, and they went after them to close down those self-sufficient family farms. Second, they go after the intelligentsia. That's anybody that's smart enough to or studied enough to know what they're doing or what they're trying to do. And third, they go after the veterans and the police officers that might remain loyal to the old regime. I think that's happening right now. All of that has happened here over the last 20 years. So we're probably really getting close to the final move, and I think Boston was sort of a psychological operation to get us used to seeing tanks on the street. They put tanks on the street to search for a teenager hiding in a boat. What was that?
Yeah, I think that you're right that, first of all, to go back to your point about the farmers, intelligentsia, and the veterans and police, that's quite correct. And the Ukraine, you had the Holodomor, where 6 million died, and they collectivized the farms there. You're quite right when you talk about the individual farming, individual family farm being a basic unit of civilization. Stalin attempted to destroy that by forcing the individual farms to close and be replaced by these collectives, which didn't work. They never did, and you actually had about 6 million starving, a real 6 million starving in the Ukraine. And of course, you don't hear about that Holocaust, and there are no Ukrainian Anne Franks. And the intelligentsia, when the Bolsheviks took over Russia, Trotsky swore that they would wipe out the intelligentsia is right. In the early 1920s, millions died, and most of them were, judges and artists and authors. They didn't go after the very poorest people because they considered that the poor peasant in his thatched roof hut was not that much of a threat in comparison to the intellectuals. And of course, when the Germans came in Barbarossa, that's what they mostly found, was just the peasants in their thatched roof huts. And of course, you're right, it would also go after any veterans who are still oath keepers and who uphold the Constitution, and those people knowing how to wield a weapon and being manly and being alert to the right of the people under the Constitution, the rights that they have under that document. Those would be three groups that they would certainly pursue initially. And remind me of your second question. There was a question you'd asked.
Well, about the family farms, I've told people that you could do this in your own neighborhood. You could grow food, not grass. And if we can generate our own electricity from the sun or the wind or the water, running water, we don't need the bankers for anything. And I think that really scares them. That's why we've seen a concentrated effort trying to keep people from growing their own food. And I'm not sure what my second question was.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. Well, no, you're absolutely right. They do not want people to be independent. They want them to be dependent on the system. They don't want people to be living off the grid. It's harder to obviously, if a person is independent, you can't control them. A dependent person can be controlled. That's a basic principle that they're operating off of there. So yes, this is one of their time-worn tactics, is to keep people dependent upon the government. And that's one reason why you've had the progressive welfare state. We were talking about Roosevelt earlier. When you put lots of people on Social Security instead of encouraging them to save money on their own, and which they would probably do better at than the government will do for you. But when you make a lot of people dependent on a welfare system, not only will they vote for you if you promise them benefits, but they will then depend on you and do what you tell them. But an independent person, a person who can grow his own food, who can generate his own electricity, and who can barter his own goods and doesn't need the Federal Reserve notes anymore, or the chip, or whatever the electronic devices they would in the future use for transactions, that person would be a risk to their complete domination.
I believe that my whole calling for the Liberty Village concept, which is pretty simple. You take a old family farm and you put low-cost structures on it, teepees, cabins, mud bricks. I mean, people have been building their homes out of this stuff. You can build them out of hay bales. If you put together a group of people and you work together, there's a lot of things I can't do. I can't rebuild a motor. Not very good with wrenches. I'm real good with a typewriter. I'm real good with a computer. But if people would just work together and reestablish the self-sufficient family farms, we may not be able to change the world, but we could set an example for the rest of the world by doing these little villages. And actually, in the United States, we've already got them. I mean, this is how we settled this whole country. You drive down the road, you see farm after farm with the windmills, and you get into a small town America, and that's where you can buy your goods. You can go to the store, you can go to the saloon, you can have a drink, socialize with people, and go back to the farm. But if you try to do this alone, they can kind of do what they did to me. I had my little farm, I had my garden, I had my water, I had my well, I had 5 acres. I could have had other people come there in RVs or tents or teepees or cabins. And as soon as I went into town, somebody broke into my house, took all my guns, all my weapons, everything they could get their hands on. I didn't have any backup. I didn't have any support. So, and I think this is really the problem that we've got today. We've been so demonized, so taken out here, that we don't know how to work together. We can't work together. And that's probably the number one maxim on this whole globalization thing. Divide and conquer. And frankly, I don't know how to, I've been putting this information out, doing this radio show for 20 years, and I don't know how to wake people up, how to get people. Well, Clay, we can't come out to Bingham. We can't come out to New Mexico. We got jobs. We got jobs. Well, that was 20 years ago, but today the jobs just aren't there. We got so many people on welfare. We got so many people on food stamps, and you know, I'm not throwing rocks here, because the only reason I was able to make it after they tried to kill me was the fact that I was 65 years old when I got out of the hospital and I could get Social Security. Is you know, how do we get people to work together? I mean, I've got a link up on my website for a black guy in L.A., South L.A. He's South L.A. He said, you know, in South L.A. we got nothing but drive-ins and drive-throughs, drive-bys and drive-ins. You know, and the food in the drive-ins is killing more people than the drive-bys. So he started, he's got a little group there, and they're going to the vacant lots. LA's got acres of vacant lots. They're going to the vacant lots and growing food, non-GMO foods. So you can, and then somebody said, well, aren't you afraid people are going to steal it? He goes, no, that's why I put it there, so they can come take it. They can see what we're doing. They can get some food there. They can take some food home with them. And you know, if we can do that in vacant lots in South LA, why can't we do that in Texas? Why can't we do that in Ohio? Okay, why can't we do that in Kansas? Why can't we grow food instead of grass? I mean, we've already got these homes here. We got these neighborhoods. We built them on farms, and we built them on ranches. Why can't we just move back a little bit? I mean, to me, this seems like common sense. This doesn't seem to me to be anything that is radical. It doesn't seem to be anything that's controversial. You know, my grandmother in Weatherford, Texas, she lived next door to the Methodist church where my grandfather was a preacher, and she had a little victory garden, and I had the best food, the best meals I've ever had anytime I went to visit my grandmother. Why can't we do that across the country?
Well, you're certainly making me feel nostalgic when you talk about things like that. One good thing is that there seems to be a heightened awareness among people, whether liberal or conservative, however they might brand themselves, that eating healthy is important, and that there's certainly there seems to be a growing consensus against companies like Monsanto with their genetically modified food, and I feel that probably is someplace where people do have common ground, regardless of their politics. Most people would like to stay healthy, and most people would like to eat some good food. So I think that that actually is a pretty good starting point if you're looking to create unity. Unity is a troubling factor because you're right about the divide and conquer. They certainly do want to separate it. I think that the technology itself, it's pretty evident with the iPhones that people have moved over from direct one-on-one communication to texting into an iPhone, which is a form of communication, but it's not at the level that it would seem that God most probably intended it to be, the one-on-one, face-to-face communication. The title of my book is Truth is a Lonely Warrior. I live in New England, which is a particularly liberal community, and I do get together with fellow truthers, but it takes a little travel sometimes, and of course people are busy because the economy is so suppressed. A lot of people are working 2 jobs, but that is a real challenge, and I wish that I had better answers for that as to how we could become more united and be establishing more communities, because as you say, when you gave the example of when your supplies and guns were ripped off, when you have a community working together to protect each other, that there's a lot of strength. Military tacticians have known that for a long time. If you want to destroy the enemy, you split them, you corner a small group, you flank that small group, and you move in and you destroy it. So the more we can be bonded together, and the more we can be united together, especially in our local communities, because we can tweet and send emails to people across the country, but in your own personal living situation, that isn't necessarily going to help you. How to find more people and how to congregate better. I suppose churches are one place to be doing that, or joining groups like an Oath Keepers group or a Tea Party group, or We Are Change, or these other groups truther groups that exist on a local level is one way of forming bonding with people in your local community. I know the John Birch Society was successful for many decades. It still is. Of course, they are still continuing today at setting up what they call chapters, where people, like-minded people, would come together and congregate. So there are ways, and I think if you're going to bond together, you certainly have to have things in common, because you obviously can get along best with people whose views, whose ideology you share or largely share.
Well, it's one of the conversations I have. A lot of people are talking about putting down the government, the United States. Yeah, we've turned. We've got communism in our capitals. Yeah, your politicians have been bought and paid for. I went through presidential elections. I traveled with Bob Dole and Pat Buchanan when I was supporting Charles Collins, who was running for president. But with all of the bad in our government, the foundation of this country, with our Bill of Rights and the Constitution as it was supposed to be, is a good thing. It's something that unites us, and that's I've told people I don't want to be the last or the only free American. I want us all to be. And the real question is, how can we work together? That's why I've asked people for donations, because I don't sell advertising. If I put this information out, tell people about your books, how they can get your books, tell people about you, and I only put on and interview people that are doing something worthwhile, something that is good, not just for the United States, for the world. And that's why I don't have any problem supporting Putin and the people of Russia. I've said possibly after being under communism for 100 years in Russia and China, maybe the Russians and the Chinese woke up and realized that what the Germans were trying to do, what Hitler was trying to do, was to protect the Germans from the evil of Stalin and Mao Zedong. And it looks like that is actually happening now. We've got Russia and China and India uniting under something called BRICS. This is a new monetary system to oppose the Federal Reserve and the IMF. Do you have you looked into that? Is this you know, everything that we're talking about here, somebody, as soon as I went to a group, whether it was the Truth Seekers in Austin or the Breakfast Club in Tucson, somebody showed up to try to discourage people from working with me, supporting me. This is how they work. And somehow we've got to educate people enough so they understand this is what they do. Did Russia and China wake up? Is BRICS a alternate financial system? China's got more gold than we got. They've already stolen our gold back in the 30s. And, you know, I don't hold the today's Americans that responsible, because their grandfathers, their fathers, their grandfathers bought into the propaganda put out by the banksters. Hell, they let Roosevelt steal their gold for, well, take it to the banks, and they'll give you $16 an ounce for it. Take your gold in, and if you don't, hey, we could put you in jail. So we were already brainwashed. We were already, they were already stealing our gold back in 1933. If we don't know that today, we don't understand that.
It's been very, very progressive the way they have changed the meaning of money. In 1913, we created the Federal Reserve, which enabled them to create money from nothing, just print it up, but at least it was redeemable in gold. And then, as you point out, that stopped with Roosevelt. You know, as soon as he came into office, he demanded that people turn in their gold to the government. People could no longer own gold unless it was a form of jewelry. It could no longer be money. And that was a great step forward. Of course, as soon as they turned it in, they doubled the price of gold. Right. Then Nixon, of course, took the United States totally off the gold standard, and he said it would be temporary, but it turned out to be permanent. So that took care of gold on a national level. But it's and of course the final step in the transformation of money would be to make everything digital. And once, you know, it used to be that people would keep money in their homes, hidden in mattresses or walls or whatever, to protect it, and it was solid. It was coins, of course. It was solid before they went to paper money. But when money becomes digital, it's very dangerous, because now they can steal it with a few keystrokes. You know, back in the days of the Bolsheviks, the Bolsheviks went from home to home to steal people's money and gold plates, and they broke into the churches and stole the jewels and the gold there. But they don't have to do that now. Now they can just go into your bank account electronically and steal your money. How easy is that compared to actually having to go in someone's home and physically carry out the money? So there's been a tremendous change in the way, a progressive change in the way that wealth can be confiscated. And of course, that is part of the plan, to confiscate wealth and make it the system that the Bible describes the Antichrist would have, that no one could buy or sell without the mark of the beast, and that would presumably be start out as some kind of a national ID, which you'd have to swipe, and then eventually would be an implantable chip. And of course, there's tremendous amount of data about the RFID chips, and they've already chipped people in some places and having them use their hands to swipe for identification purposes or even making purchases. So we're definitely headed in that direction, and money has been moving in this direction for some time now.
Did I ask you about BRICS?
Yes.
What do you think?
That's right. You know, I saw an interesting analysis. There's different views on it in the alternative media. And one analysis that I thought was pretty interesting was that the Western bankers realized that people have wised up to the Fed and the IMF, and they've become so unpopular that they actually want BRICS to introduce some sort of world currency that they could still control from behind the scenes. In other words, some people think that maybe the BRICS is a ruse, but on the other hand, it seems that the Western banksters do get awfully nervous when when Saddam Hussein decided to sell his oil for euros instead of dollars, and that's when we suddenly turned on him after supporting him. We had Rumsfeld meeting with him before, and we were giving him weapons, and when Gaddafi decided to sell his oil for gold, we bombed Libya. So it does seem that they take this dollar-based system quite seriously. Maybe there's dissent within the ranks of this whole Rothschild Zionist oligarchy. I don't know, but there may be something to it. I don't know ultimately if BRICS has a solution that would work for the world, or if it's something that would actually move us in the direction of a one world currency, which is, you know, certainly a compartment of the one world government. I don't know. What are your own thoughts, Clay?
Well,
on the BRICS.
I hope it's real. I hope they can get it together. You know, I've had people from Australia say, well, what we need to do is start a bank. Well, starting a bank doesn't work unless you control the currency. Now, if BRICS is going to come out with a gold-backed currency that we can actually afford to get into, I don't know. I don't know the inner workings here. I haven't talked to anybody on the inside. Whether it's a scam, whether it's just could be just an internet scam. I don't know yet. And that's one of the reasons I try to tell people, you know, you buy the books, order my videos, order my tapes, support this show. We'll give you the information as we get it. But I can't control and I can't recommend, you know, a bank in China, a bank in Russia. You know, I don't know that we can even talk to anyone in Russia that actually knows what's going on without being targeted by the Homeland Security. Obviously, they're tapping our phones, tapping our communications on the internet. So we're in a real precarious position here. I would say, you know, the answer is your neighborhood, your town, your community, your family. If you can make them understand, if you know, and you can use shows like this, books like Truth is a Lonely Warrior, to educate them on what has happened, then we've got a chance. We don't need anybody's money. We can barter, we can trade. What can you do in your garage? What can you make? What can we do? We got flea markets. We got yard sales. You can, and as Ron Finley, that's the black guy from L.A., he says growing your own food is like printing your own money. So the answers are not necessarily global. The real answers are local. What does your neighbor do? What does your neighbor know? If you don't talk to them, you'll never know. You'll never know. And this is why I encourage people. Don't take my word for anything. Check it out for yourself. Research it for yourself. What does it take to grow a tomato in your backyard? I got tomatoes growing. You know, grow a head of lettuce, you know. What is wrong with that? At least you know it's not genetically modified. And on the plus side, there are companies, there are corporations like the Bright Farms. I think they've got enterprises going in 6 or 7 states. Have you heard of them yet?
I've not. Who are they?
They are putting greenhouses on the roofs or parking lot of the local supermarkets. And they're growing food, non-genetically modified food, in these greenhouses. And so the food that you buy in the supermarket was picked that day, that morning. It's fresh. It's non-genetically modified. And they're doing that in 6 states in the supermarket chains.
That sounds like a great idea. Just to pick up on something you said, you mentioned bartering. You know, I just wanted to mention that regardless of whether BRICS turns out to be a positive or a negative in the end, regardless of what money system we have, money is only a symbol of the value of goods or services. It's all it's ever been. The banks just figured out that they could take that symbol and create it endlessly to create wealth for themselves. They found that they could create money electronically and loan it at interest, and if people couldn't pay it back, then they could demand their houses and other things in exchange for this thing that they made out of nothing. But bartering is certainly a way that they used to do it in many cases, and also could be an excellent counter to whatever system, whether it's a chip or electronic swipe of your wrist to buy things. Bartering is an excellent way. Obviously, one advantage of money is that you can put it in different denominations, and if you've got cows and you have a doctor's appointment, you can't give the guy a cow for that. I mean, it's worth too much. But bartering and exchange of services is one thing that they can't stop. They probably would, in the ultimate police state, try to outlaw bartering. No doubt they would, knowing the kind of satanic intentions they have for mankind. But that's all that money is. It symbolizes the food that you grow organically, or the skills that you have as a car mechanic. That's all it is. It's just a symbol of that. But you can always use those services and goods to trade for each other in a form of bartering to overcome these financial systems, whether the BRICS comes out to be a good thing or not.
Now, that is actually, there are answers to that too. Up in New York, they have there's a little town up there, and the name just escapes me for a second. Somebody here in the chat room will probably tell me. They print their own money. It's called Hours. They're Ithaca Hours. And little town of Ithaca started issuing these hours, and each hour is worth about $10, and you can go anywhere, just about anywhere in Ithaca, and the businesses will accept an hour. And I believe they're doing the same thing in Colorado. Somebody's got Mountain Money or something like that. So people are trying to get away from the whole Federal Reserve banking system. And I did some interviews with them last year. Ithaca Hours has been around for several years and doing pretty well. I've told people.
And one good.
Go ahead. What?
Oh, one good thing about that too is that hopefully they don't create too much of it, and it retains its value over the years. Whereas we know that the Federal Reserve, with its quantitative easing, is constantly creating trillions of more dollars, and the value of your money goes down. Plus, they skew the numbers. They falsify the level of inflation. So, people on Social Security get a 1.7% increase when the true inflation rate is about 9%. So they're losing money every year. But with the kind of things you're talking about, like Ithaca hours and mountain money, presumably you don't get that type of hyperinflation, right? So the money would retain its value over years, and I can't think of any reason offhand why that wouldn't be perfectly legal. It's just like a form of bartering. In this case, you're bartering with money instead of a good.
I have told people that we have really had the answers for 100 years, but it's been kept from us. The whole Tesla wanted to give us free electricity. Today, we've got a lot of people that are advertising free electricity. Here, you can build this, or you only got to send us $49. We'll send you the plans for it. But nobody that I have never talked to anybody that spent $49 and got something to show for it. If you can build one, build two of them, send it to me. If it works, if I can plug my house into it, if I can plug my fifth wheel into it, if I can plug my computer into it, well, then I'll help you sell every one you can make. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. So, is the free electricity the over unity electricity? Is that just a daydream? Is it a scam? Or do we really, I've seen a demonstration, very simple demonstration. Somebody took what looked like a bicycle wheel, turned inside out. So you've got a groove or a channel down on the inside of the wheel. The spokes are on the outside, and somebody put a steel ball in the wheel. I guess they oiled up the axle so it turns easily. And then they put a permanent magnet just outside the wheel, and it pulled that steel ball and made the wheel turn. So, something that simple. I was reminded of when I had my bicycle, and I got this little generator that hooked onto the wheel, and when you rode the bicycle, the wheel turned and the generator turned, and you had a headlight. Something that simple could be used in a little larger scale to power your own home. And I've seen these magnetic generators, supposedly magnetic generators, that they had in Australia. You could stack them and it would provide electricity. I've also heard that India is supposed to be approving that. Instead of trying to kill people that have done it, India is trying to encourage people to provide their own power, their own energy. So we're constantly faced with, we've got the intelligence, we've got the ability, we've got the history, we've got the way to do this, but I also know I had a father-in-law, his name was Sheriff Babcock, and really a bright guy. He could make anything work, build anything, worked on the Aswan Dam. He got the patents on a Pogue carburetor and built one, put it on his truck. A few days later, a few weeks later, two guys in blue pinstripe suits showed up. Hi, Mr. Babcock. Listen, man, you gotta destroy that carburetor you got on your truck there. Take it off, and you gotta destroy the one you're building for your neighbor there. Yeah, what happens if I don't? We'll kill you. And we've had people that built cars that ran on water. We got ships, U.S. Navy ships out there in the middle of the ocean that's converting the water they float on to electricity. So we've got the solutions there. Government doesn't want you to have it any more than they want you to grow your own food. So we're really in a, this is part of the war on humanity by the banksters, by the industrialists. You know, if we stopped having to pay $100 a month or more for electricity, if we could just produce it in our backyard from magnets, we wouldn't need the banks. It would change the whole balance of power. Your opinions on that, James?
Well, I mentioned before about the war on Hussein after he wanted to sell oil and euros, and on Gaddafi after wanting to go to the gold dinar to sell his oil. It seems that oil and energy are a consistent theme here throughout all of this. So you go back to the Rockefellers, and they wanted medicine to be largely oil-based. And if you go back to the CIA intervention in Iran in 1953, when a new leader named Mossadegh wanted to nationalize oil, they took him out. And but then when the Shah wanted to nationalize oil in Iran in 1979, Jimmy Carter and the U.S. State Department and other people within the Anglo-American establishment made sure that he was taken out. So it seems that they want to keep us oil dependent, as I think is a safe thing to say. The Rockefellers, of course, heavily invested in oil going back to the days of John D. and Standard Oil in the 19th century. So that seems to be part of it. And part of it also seems to keep us dependent on their system, which is a topic that you mentioned earlier. And although I've not seen something like a car driven on water, I don't doubt for a moment that with enough ingenuity and all the resources that are available to mankind, that better systems of production could be created. I'm sure that there are many technologies that have been made suppressed by the establishment for the simple reason that they want us to, that they are Luciferian, that they do want us to depend upon them for the ultimate goal of controlling us and bringing about our own ruin. So yes, I'm certain that much better technologies are out there, and that many of them have been put in the scrap heap of innovation as a result of the suppression by the powers that be.
I believe that sometime probably in the near future, things there was one lady that said, you know, it's too soon to shoot the bastards. But I think we are reaching a point through the internet, through shows like this, through books like yours, that people are waking up. People are understanding that we've really got to confront this. We got to work together some way and oppose this global tyranny. It ain't going to be now. This is one of my pet peeves. The last presidential election, the American people gave $1 billion to the Republicans and the Democrats. Where'd that money go? The money went to the media companies for advertising, and so the media companies told you about the candidates that the world bankers, the banksters wanted in there, that would do their bidding. And we've got a whole Congress that is just pretty much totally corrupt. Many of them are lawyers working for the British Accredited Registry. I mean, we're talking about a foreign government controlling our legal and our financial systems. Only if the people wake up and understand that this is what's happening. If that $1 billion came into some type of organization that was actually sponsoring people that aren't lawyers, I mean, that's probably the best thing you can say about Ron Paul, is he wasn't a lawyer, but being a doctor isn't too much better. And I've been through the presidential elections. If they don't turn the cameras on when your candidate is speaking, you'll never hear about him. Somehow people have got to understand that this is just the way it is, and then we can start making some changes in it. Maybe the changes will be on a small scale in our towns, in our counties. And that's really what I've tried to concentrate on. I won't even have a presidential candidate on my show, because I know how it operates. If they say anything about the Zionists, if they say anything about Israel that isn't positive, nobody will hear about them. Do you find that to be true? I mean, what is Israel? Is Israel a safe country for criminals, for the Zionists?
That's what it is, and I believe, Clay, that their plan is ultimately, once they get their communist-style world government going, because, you know, it's the Rothschilds again who are behind Zionism, communism, and globalism, which is also world government, that the capital of that world government is going to be in Jerusalem. And remember, this is a satanic Luciferian system, and since Jerusalem is considered the world's most holy city by, it's considered holy by Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike, that is the place that Satan would want to set up his throne so he can thumb his nose at that's in 2 Thessalonians, let me just see if I can quickly get this quote. Oh, here's what it says. 2 Thessalonians 2. It says, quote, "Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day," we're talking about the final days, "will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction, who will oppose and exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God," unquote. And so that's why I think that there's this plot in Israel to rebuild Solomon's temple. I think that's where this so-called millennial leader is going to be, and he's going to say he's God, but he'll say he's the Christ, but he's actually going to be the Antichrist. And I think that that is the intention of Zionism. It's laid out in the protocols of the Elders of Zion, that they're going to reveal this King Despot, they call him, and that is their intention, to bring this Luciferian rulership about. So, yeah, I regard, Israel is, the name Israel is very deceptive. A lot of Christians have been faked out into thinking, well, it calls itself Israel, so it must be the same as biblical Israel, and certainly it has those trappings, and I have no doubt that there are some, a good number of Jews in Israel who, faithfully follow the Torah and are worshiping in accordance with their own wishes and don't realize they're part of a Luciferian plot. But that's certainly what it is, because it all ties together throughout history. The same banksters that funded Israel, in fact, Edmund de Rothschild is on their 500 shekel note in Israel. Give you an idea of the Rothschild influence there. It's the same banksters behind world government, communism, and Zionism again. So all leading towards this ultimate world tyranny. I do regard Israel as a tyranny, a blot, and all you have to do is look at the plight of the Gazans, the Palestinians, to understand the lack of humanity. and the anti-humanity that this state stands for. Again, regarding, I'm talking about the state, but of course I'm not talking about all people there as a blanket generalization.
What is your, have you researched anything about the whole Christian identity thing that says the original Israelites crossed the Caucasus Mountains, went into Russia, went into Germany, went into France, went into England? Because the so-called Jews that are there, that Jesus warned us about, the Jews who say they're Jews but are not, Christian identity says that those tribes of Israel are us, you and I.
I've seen research that says that the white American British are actually descendants of Japheth, who was one of the sons of Noah. But I do follow along with what Arthur Koestler, the Jewish author, wrote in his book, The 13th Tribe, that what they call the Ashkenazi Jews, who are, I believe, about 90% of what's called the Jewish population today, are actually descendants of Khazaria. And that they were driven, they were world power above the Black and Caspian Seas, and they were in competition with Islam to the south and Constantinople with Christians to the west. And rather than become subordinate to either one, they converted the entire country of Khazaria to Judaism in around 800 AD, and that's right in Wikipedia. That's not something that some anti-Semite brought up. And those people did convert to Judaism, and when the Mongols invaded around the 1200s, they moved into Germany and Poland, and they became the Yiddish-speaking Jewish people, the so-called people of the Holocaust that are discussed. And I believe that is primarily what happened to those people. As to the original Jews, a lot of people think that those are the Sephardic Jews, the ones who went to Spain, the darker-skinned ones that more resemble Arabs, as you would expect, since Arabs are also descended from Abraham. But that's a pretty heady question. Christian identity and going into Britain, I don't know about. I suspect that those are not Jews. If there were, I would think there would be more remnants of Jewish culture in England than we see today.
I think it's a possibility that the original Christians, the followers of Jesus, may be what we call Palestinians today.
Well, there's no question. There's no question that many of the Palestinians and American Christians don't get this. A very high percentage of the ones who have been suppressed and killed by the Zionists in Israel have been Christian. It's interesting that before the Zionists moved in 1948, there were Christians and Muslims and a small number of Jews living very peacefully in the Middle East, very peacefully in Jerusalem. It was not a troublesome community. People lived in peace there. Syria had very peaceful land. It wasn't until the Zionists arrived, their scheme of conquest, that all this trouble came up. And of course, America's gotten involved with it, and 9/11 persuaded us to get behind Israel's program of expansion, and we've had these endless Middle East wars, which are just such a shame. So many people dead, and the whole territory of the Middle East in chaos now.
You know, I've been all over this country, and I've spent time in New York. I went into shops there owned by Jews. I went into shops owned by Muslims. I went into shops owned by Christians. They got along just fine right there in New York City, and I've asked myself, why can't they do that in Jerusalem? Why can't they do that in Israel or Palestine? And it's, again, it's because of these Zionists. They want it all. They're greedy. They want to control your money. They want to control your information. They want to control your movies. And I'm opposed to that. That's why I do what I do. And James, I got to tell you, I'm really enjoying your book. And I've got links to your site up on the Free American. This show The URL for the show is right under your name. And I hope you make this available. Anybody that you've got listening, I'd appreciate if we're supporting each other and we're trying to get the truth out. You know, we've got a much better shot at winning this battle that we're in. And we're in a battle here, and it's good against evil.
You're absolutely right, and as you say, it's important we stay united. By the way, on my links page, I have a link to your show, and whenever you and I do a show together and you archive it, I always put that archive show up on my my website's welcome page so people can see it right away.
I will have,
absolutely, there's a strength in unity.
I will have this show, I've recorded it for YouTube. It'll be available on YouTube, Free American 69. It'll be available on Free American 69 on Facebook, as well as the freeamerican.com. And wish I could fix it so I could have you on and have you on the video too. But right now you got to just be satisfied with seeing my pretty face. But all of the information is there. James, again, thank you very much. God bless you. And we'll do this again soon.
God bless you, Clay. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, sir.
Bye-bye now.